Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I am Ross McCorkle, your host, and above me here on the screen, my co-host, as always, Joe Clark, and we've got the NFL Draft in, Tuesday? So just 2 days away. 2 days and a few hours away, we will be talking about the first round of the draft being underway, one of the more exciting days of the calendar year, especially for those of you that follow along with the draft process. Of course, the season is where all the excitement happens, but this is the biggest part of the offseason and what we talk about for months and months. Finally, the hypotheticals can become actual. We actually have things to talk about next week other than speculation, so we look forward to that. I'm sure you guys do too. Joe, Mike Tomlin and Omar spoke today. They said some things. I won't say that they were very revealing in a lot of regards, but there were a few things to glean from that. If you want to take it away with our first topic here, what's the top thing from that press conference that kind of spoke to you a little bit?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, honestly, was Omar Khan said it's a good quarterback class. Mike Tomlin spoke at length about Shedeur Sanders. So, in a class that, a lot of analysts and draftniks have said is not a good quarterback class, Khan said repeatedly that he feels it's a good class. There's good talent in this class. So, that was definitely a little bit telling to me because it makes me think they're going to draft a quarterback in the first round or the third round. And it wouldn't surprise me really at this point if it did come in the first round. I was a little bit surprised that he was so, adamant that it was a good class. And so maybe it's a little bit of preparing the fans like, hey, we feel like it's a good quarterback class. So when here's our first round pick, this is a guy that we really like, and like pause the criticism a little bit. So that was definitely, to me, probably the biggest takeaway from the whole thing.
I agree. Let me rattle off the exact quote here. Mike Tomlin was asked about Shedeur Sanders and maybe his connection to his father, Deion Sanders. Tomlin said, "To be quite honest with you, we didn't talk a whole lot about my relationship with his father. It was a normal pre-draft visit to spend time with a young man, to talk ball, to get to know him as an individual, to get to see how he processes and sees the game and how he articulates his football experience. From that standpoint, it was a very normal visit and a very productive one." So whatever mystique there is about what kind of visit this was, maybe it was a little longer. I think we mentioned in previous weeks that he was really the only, there was one other pre-draft visitor that day, but typically they have 3 in on a day, and this day they had 1 from out of town and 1 in town. And so maybe they did spend a little extra time with him, but otherwise it seemed like a normal visit. And what Tomlin said about it is, quote, "I think the things that stood out were evident in his video. There's a toughness there that doesn't get talked about enough. There's a competitive spirit there that doesn't get talked about enough. I know he is very talented, and he's made a lot of plays for his university and his team, but the intangible qualities displayed on tape were impressive to me." And so Mike Tomlin, we've heard reports that he likes Shedeur Sanders, and I think now that is obviously confirmed. I think there were some conflicting reports last week, even. I think it was our most read article of the month, potentially, or up there. I think it might have been the most read of the month so far, or if not, very, very close. And it was Aaron Wilson from KPRC in Houston saying that the meeting between the Steelers, or the visit between the Steelers and Sanders, did not go well. And so what does that tell you? Well, I don't think a whole lot of Steelers fans are on board with the Shedeur Sanders potential draft pick there in the first round, but it does seem like Mike Tomlin is. And so other insiders had kind of disputed Aaron Wilson's report. What does that tell us? I don't want to say that Wilson was making things up. I don't think he was. I think he's a plenty credible reporter. But what could it mean? Could it mean that Mike Tomlin likes him and somebody else in the building doesn't? Joe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility. It's just, if somebody in the building's leaking that report, I don't know why they would leak it to, Aaron Wilson, who then goes on like a little podcast and reports it, and then, it gets picked up all from there. But you'd think if somebody was leaking the report, they would leak it to, at least somebody in the local media, even if it's an Andrew Filippone, because, he'd be more than happy to report that the Steelers didn't like Shedeur Sanders. So it's a little confusing why that report came from Aaron Wilson. And again, not to say he made it up or he's lying, but either he got some bad info from somebody outside the building or somebody inside the building was trying to create a narrative that, Shedeur Sanders didn't have a good visit with the Steelers. But, all the local team reporters, Jerry Dulac, heavily disputed that. And as Tony Pauline came out today, a draft analyst, and said that, Mike Tomlin really liked Shedeur Sanders. That's his guy. And with Khan's comments about it being a strong quarterback class and Sanders being at the top, like besides Cam Ward, number two, maybe number three, some people might have Jackson Dart ahead of him. You would think that, Omar Khan would be on board with that if he does really think it's a strong class. So it's interesting, like, where that could have came from, who in the building might not be a fan of taking Shedeur Sanders in the first round. But I mean, maybe it's a defensive guy that doesn't want the team to take a quarterback with a hole in the defensive line. But yeah, it was definitely interesting because that report almost immediately got refuted once it came out by multiple people. Adam Schefter refuted it, I believe, and Dulac and a few others. Peter Schrager, I think, was another one. So kind of something worth noting that so many people were quick to say no, it was actually a really good meeting. And obviously Tomlin's words today were, kind of pretty in depth talking about a specific draft prospect. So if Sanders is on the board at 21 at this point, I would think he's probably going to end up being their pick.
I agree. And there's a lot of, I'll just call it lazy analysis out there, just kind of basically saying the Steelers shouldn't take a quarterback, and that stems, a lot of that is rooted in one of two things. Either Kenny Pickett kind of gun-shy mentality of, oh, they got a quarterback in this range in the 20s. It didn't work out. It kind of set them back some years. And then there's some people who have just kind of been riding the narrative of this is a weak draft class at the quarterback position. And they've been kind of under that assumption since the beginning. And that's fair. I think it isn't the strongest quarterback class, but when you hear the Steelers say that they like several of the quarterbacks, and then they talk this glowingly of a prospect, you can't just ignore that and assume that you know better. Teams aren't always right, so maybe you do know better, but I don't think it's a fair assumption to just write that off as a possibility. I think Sanders needs to be taken seriously at number 21. And we'll talk about maybe another possibility of trading down. That's our next topic that we will get to. But I want to talk about some of the other talking points from the Tomlin compressor. Take it away on Pickens, Joe. You wrote that one up.
Yeah, so somebody asked Omar Khan about, potentially trading back into the second round and how George Pickens' contract situation influences that, basically hinting, hey, maybe you guys trade George Pickens, recoup the second round pick you traded for DK Metcalf, pick up another receiver, another position in need. And so when asked if Pickens' contract situation influenced that, Khan was pretty blunt. He said, no, we're excited to have George and DK here. I think they're going to be exciting for everybody to watch. But no, repeating the no about it doesn't influence, the decision. And then he was asked about trading back into the second round and basically said, we'll see how things shake out. We gave up a second for DK, excited that we did that. Basically didn't rule out potentially trading on the second, but he did essentially rule out the idea of trading George Pickens to get back into the second round, which I'm not particularly surprised about. I mean, last year they refused to include Pickens in trade talks for Brandon Ayuk. It seems as if they want to have another receiver with Pickens and pair them and see how they can do as a duo. So now it's Metcalf and Pickens. Even if it's just 1 year for Pickens, which it may be, although Brick Pryor did report yesterday, it seems like things are trending towards an extension. Although I can't really see that getting done this offseason from where the team is at right now, especially after just paying Metcalf. But it does not sound like George Pickens will be on the move Friday night.
Yeah, Adam Schefter listed him as one of the expendable contracts that could potentially be included in trade stuff during the draft. I don't get that impression, as you just said, from what Khan said during that press conference, and I've really never gotten that impression that they were going to trade Pickens once they made that move. That would just lead them at square one, and this receiver class is not that great. Now, could that play in their favor because the receivers class isn't great? Could a team get desperate and kind of overpay for Pickens? Sure. And if that happens, of course, I think the Steelers would have to consider it if it was an offer they can't refuse. So that's kind of the wild card here, but you can't really prepare for that possibility until you're in the moment. And maybe a team misses on one of the top, how many first round kind of prospect receivers even are there? There's like 4 maybe. Reasonable. Burden, Aguka, McMillan, and I'm missing somebody. Golden. Am I missing anybody else in the first round there? I don't think so. So if you miss out on one of those and you're really just like the Broncos or some team that really wants a receiver, maybe then you start to poke. Maybe then you start to overpay potentially. So maybe that could come into play. But I've been operating under the assumption he will be a Steeler for the 2025 season, and I really don't even buy the whole trade deadline thing because that'll be a 7-game rental for whoever trades for him, unless somebody's really desperate and really thinks they have a chance to make a push for like a championship and he's the missing piece. I mean, how often do these traded players at the deadline make a massive impact right away? I think we saw last year, at least for the Steelers, not very often. Even for a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who went to the Chiefs, it wasn't like a massive, massive impact that maybe some thought it would be right away. And I think Devontae Adams did all right when he was traded, so he's maybe the outlier there. But my point being, I don't really see Pickens having a ton of value at that trade deadline. It's probably better at that point just to wait it out and hopefully get that comp pick for the 2027 draft. Yes, that's hard to bet on things that are multiple years out, and if he gets injured, then that could completely destroy that value for the Steelers. If, say, he ends up in a Juju Smith-Schuster situation where he has to sign a 1-year prove-it deal that isn't worth very much, and then he's only worth like a 6th-round comp pick or something like that. These are possibilities that have to be considered, and certainly I guess they will consider those when fielding trade offers now or at the deadline. But yeah, I get the impression he is staying, and I'm excited for that duo. Safety is a position that was talked about kind of throughout this pre-draft process. I know our Alex Kozora has been kind of talking about that for a while. It did sound kind of like they were downplaying the idea of safety being a need. Now, could they draft one later? Yes, I think they could draft one later. I don't think it'll be something that's drafted over the first 2 days, and probably not in the 4th or 5th round either, if I had to guess, unless one of those guys they really like is sitting there. What was the exact quote? They asked him, it was the last question of the press conference, they asked him about the 3 safety packages, and DeMonte Casey's not on the roster. Do you guys need a safety? Yada, yada. And Mike Tomlin just said, we signed Thornhill. Like, that's all he said. And so to me, that's kind of downplaying. Like, we don't need a safety. Thornhill's a good player. And I agree. I think Thornhill actually fits very well in this 3-man rotation. Any of the 3 can be used as a chess piece, kind of moved around the defense. Minka Fitzpatrick will probably stay at free most of the time. And, last year, Elliott, they had him kind of playing big nickel some of the time. They had him in the box. I think they can kind of use all 3 of them interchangeably as needed to kind of exploit matchups, move people around. I'm sure they want to get Minka on the move. When he really started making plays for the team at the end of, or like the middle to the end of last season, is when they were moving him around. So I'm sure they will take advantage of that. I thought Tomlin said something interesting about nose tackles and how that might pertain to one Kenneth Grant, who a lot of people are interested in. Joe, what did he say there?
Yeah, let me pull up the exact quote real quick. But essentially, it was that nose tackles are a dying breed in the NFL. And with Kenneth Grant not coming in for a pre-draft visit, it's a little bit telling now because, he could be on a board at 21. He's a guy that the Steelers had a conversation with at the Combine that Grant raved about. So he's a guy that, a lot of people kind of had projected to go to the Steelers, him and Derek Harmon as the 2 first-round defensive linemen. Direct quote from Tomlin was, I think the nose is a disappearing animal the way that the fullback is a disappearing animal in our game. So that definitely doesn't bode well for the team spending a first-round pick on a guy that would, primarily be a nose like Grant. Although what it does kind of tell me, or maybe a little bit interesting to me, is if the Steelers could maybe take a chance on a guy in the middle rounds, maybe a guy like Jamari Caldwell, because right now Keanu Benton has been playing, when they do have a nose, they've been having Keanu Benton play the nose. And, he's a 2nd-round pick. He's a guy that the team has a lot of expectations for this year. So maybe they don't want to use Benton as much over the nose as they have in the past. So take a guy in the middle rounds. They used the 3-4 a lot less last season, so you can take a middle round guy, plug him in as the nose, and kick Benton out to the edge, or to the end, to a defensive end role. So that's something that I think could be a little bit interesting, and maybe while downplaying the possibility of Grant in the first round, it means maybe the team would feel a little bit more comfortable playing a mid-late round rookie a little bit more in that sort of role and a limited usage. So something to possibly consider, given that that's kind of been what Benton has been doing. And if they want to get more out of him and maximize his productivity, it's something that's been talked about a lot this offseason. So, definitely a way to do that.
Yeah, I've kind of been hesitant on Grant. I don't think I've placed him in any of my mocks. I've placed Nolan. That was my first mock. I placed Harmon. That was my second mock. And my last two have both been Shedeur Sanders, kind of flipping over to the quarterback side of things. Grant is somebody I don't view as the best or wisest use of a first-round pick, and I know I'll get some flack there. That's okay. I do think that there are big body guys that you can put in the middle that are not as promising, don't have as high of upside as Grant, but they have plenty of upside, and they're good players. They're good starters. That's all you really need in that spot. And I think you said it. Jamari Caldwell is my top option for that. At 342 at the Senior Bowl, got down to 332 by the Combine, is aiming to be at 325 or 320. He was already super quick for how large of a human being he was at the Senior Bowl when I watched him. And shedding, what would that be? 20, like roughly 20 pounds. I can't imagine how quick he's going to be. And so he's a guy who absolutely can offer some pass rush juice. You don't need to take him off the field on third downs. You can kind of do some interesting things with, as you said, Keanu Benton, who they said that they kind of view as capable of playing anywhere along the line, not necessarily just inside. I think they want him to be inside in some of those sub-package kind of third down type situations. But I think there's absolutely, with Caldwell, you'd be able to do some creative things there. Aaron Rodgers not going to factor into the Steelers' draft plans. I think I don't know what other answer they would have given there, so that's not necessarily news, but still worth noting here. Jaylen Warren, confidence in him as the running back one. I don't have the quote here in front of me. I think you wrote that one, didn't you?
Yeah, I got the quote up. So basically, Mike Tomlin hinted that, not hinted, he said that Jaylen Warren was dealing with injuries last season, but he's ready for his role. So the direct quote was, I certainly feel comfortable with his ability to do so regarding Warren playing or being the RB1. He got hampered by injuries some in 2024. He appears to be ready to answer that. I know he's excited for his opportunity. I don't think myself or anyone within the organization question his talents in regards to his ability to manage that role. I mean, not a huge surprise. I don't know what else you would say there. The Steelers obviously have a lot of interest in running backs in this draft class. They brought in 9 for pre-draft visits. A lot of them are middle round running backs, and I think the expectation really was that they take a guy that can work in with Warren and with Kenneth Gainwell, and that Warren would probably be the guy that starts. Last year, he had the hamstring in the preseason. He was kind of not right the first few weeks of the year, and then he had the knee sprain that I think knocked him out for 2 weeks, 2 games. So wasn't fully healthy last year. Still put up good numbers. Just wasn't the same guy he was the year before. And he had 61 receptions. Was a little bit more dynamic for the Steelers, but they're comfortable with Warren. I mean, last year the Steelers kind of utilized both Warren and Najee Harris and Cordero Patterson a little bit. This year they're going to probably utilize 3 guys because they're probably going to draft somebody. They don't show that much interest pre-draft, pre-draft visitors, combine meetings in a running back and not make him and not, draft the position. And then Warren and Kenneth Gainwell, I do think maybe it lessens the chances of them taking a guy in the first round if Omar and Hampton is on the board, or maybe even a Travion Henderson in the first. But I think, Warren can start for sure, but they're going to work in Gainwell, and they're going to work in whoever they wind up drafting, whether, it's Bashal Tutin or Dylan Sampson or DJ Giddens or one of these mid-round running backs. But, comfortable that Warren can be the starter. I think he can kind of prove that he's capable of being a starter and taking on more of a role this year. I definitely think it is something he can handle, and Tomlin seems to think so as well, and the front office seems to think so. So be interested to see what direction they go there, but I don't think that really rules out them drafting a running back in, any sense.
How many of these running backs they had in for pre-draft visits are kind of your big body, 3-down type of guys? You've got Omarion Hampton, Ollie Gordon, and Caleb Johnson. I think that's it. And so I think we really need to consider, Travion Henderson, maybe a little bit. He's definitely a speedster, home run kind of guy, but I think he's a little bit bigger than some of these other guys like RJ Harvey and Bashal Tutin. But I think we have to definitely consider the fact that Jaylen Warren is going to be the top back, and more than likely they're going to draft one of these speedsters, going all the way back to Jerry Dulac's initial report in, I think, January about what the Steelers were looking for in a running back, and it was a guy who could get the edge. And it really looks like they emphasize that with their visits. Would not be surprised at all if that's what they end up drafting. I think I had Jaden Blue from Texas in my latest mock draft in the 5th round. I believe I had him. And I think that's kind of the sweet spot for a running back. If we had more time, we'd go through our mock drafts, but this is a jam-packed episode. But Joe did post his final mock draft on Saturday. I posted my final one on Sunday. Do check those out. I think Alex Kozores is today. Pretty much everybody from the Steelers Depot team has a final mock draft, predictive mock draft, up on the site. Maybe Dave Bryan is the last one to go, which is tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. Always highly anticipated there from Dave. The last thing here I will say about Tomlin and Khan, and this kind of segues us into the next topic, is Omar Khan talking about the possibility of trades in the draft. Kind of mentioned they are always open to whatever. However, with 6 draft picks, it's more likely that they stay put or move back, and less likely that they trade up. And I think Tomlin kind of left the door open to either, saying both are possible. I mean, maybe it seems like he's really into Shedeur Sanders, so if Shedeur's within a few picks and they start to get nervous, could they trade up? I suppose it's possible, but as Khan said, it's more likely they stay put or trade back. Now, Adam Schefter yesterday said that they could trade back. He kind of labeled them as a team that was looking to trade back. Today, Yahoo Sports' Charles Robinson says that there's realistic buzz about the Steelers trading back and taking a quarterback late in round 1. Joe, if they do trade back, I just don't think that they would be able to trade back and also get Shedeur. I'm not even sure if they'd be able to stay put and get Shedeur Sanders. So what does that mean in your mind? Do you think they're able to trade back and get somebody like a Derek Harmon? I know there was that injury news that broke yesterday, or I guess an injury report kind of situation with him that broke yesterday. Do you think that means Dart, Milroe, Shuck? What's your opinion there?
Yeah, I think if they're trading back for a quarterback, I think Milroe would probably be the guy. They met with him ahead of his pro day. There's been reports that they're very interested in Milroe. I mean, right now the betting odds have Dart going within the top 25 picks. So if the Steelers trade back to the late first round, as Robinson posited, it would probably not. Dart might not be there. Sanders wouldn't be there. So then Milroe or Shuck would be the guys that are there. Milroe to me would be more likely as a higher upside late round or late first round selection. But I think if they did trade back, it would make sense to, maybe take a defensive lineman, like if Harmon does fall due to the injury, or even, Tyleik Williams, or maybe not in the first round, but if you trade back and you get another second, you can take a guy like Darius Alexander or something. Um, I have a hard time seeing them trade back if a guy like Sanders is on the board, obviously, given they seem to really like him. But they do need more draft capital. If only 6 picks, it would, and in a class where a lot of the analysis has been that the guys from 10 to 30 are all kind of, you're getting the same level of player, just a matter of what's the better fit. So in a class where there's, jam-packed in terms of talent, it might make sense to trade back, pick an extra pick, and get a guy who talent-wise at 29 or 30 is the same you'd get at 21. So, I mean, personally, I'm definitely in favor of trading back and getting more picks and building in a draft class that's not super top heavy, but is very deep. I don't know if it's going to happen because A, you need to find a willing trade partner. Why would a team, jump up to take a guy at 21 if, again, same reasoning, if you can get a player that's kind of the same talent wise, unless, a team, obviously every team's board's different. A team might have a higher grade, or if there's a guy falling that they really like. I think the more likely possibility for the Steelers trading back is if a team, like the Browns or the Giants, don't take a quarterback at 2 or 3 and then jump ahead of them and take, Shedeur, or take a Dart or something like that. And then so the Steelers don't have their quarterback on the board and they move back. So that's a possibility I could see happening, but I'm a little hard pressed just to see them moving back, given, they have the clear need along the defensive line. Unless they really do think Harmon's going to fall, and then they have a need at quarterback. And if a quarterback's there at 21 that they really like, which it's rare to get a quarterback you really like at 21, I think they'd probably stay and take that guy.
Yeah, Jerry Dulac reporting that they have first round grades on both Jackson Dart and Shedeur Sanders. It seems to me like Sanders was probably ahead of Dart in that pecking order, but yeah, they also mentioned in today's press conference that there are, quote, several guys that they would not trade away from in the first round. Omar Khan kind of borrowing one from Kevin Colbert's book, where Colbert used to say, if we're going to trade back 3 spots, we got to have 3 guys that we're willing to take there. So kind of ensuring that they get who they want, not leaving anything up to chance. Khan didn't say in those exact terms, but said you hate to trade away from a guy that can help the team. And then they said, or Tomlin said, several guys they would not trade away from, though they're finalizing that list right now. To me, this is my opinion, and chime in with yours. Are you assuming that Shedeur and Dart are both on that list of several players?
I would think so. If they really do have a first round grade on Dart, then I would think they'd have to be on the list, because if you have a first round grade on a quarterback and he's there, and you have a clear need for a future quarterback, you take him. I mean, if they have a first round grade on Dart, even though I wouldn't be happy if they did it, then take him over Derek Harmon. Like, it's rare that you're going to be able to get your quarterback of the future and at 21. But then again, like they claim they had a first round grade on Mason Rudolph, they waited until the third round to take him. So it's
Right.
like, if they really liked Mason Rudolph that much, why didn't they take him in the first round there? So it's weird the way this team operates. Like, how much of it do you really believe? I'm kind of a little leery in how much I believe, but yeah, if they do have a first round grade on him, then I would think he'd be on that list.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, the Mason Rudolph thing is interesting, though. I think you could say that the draft is always a marrying of value and need, and back then it wasn't a need as much, obviously, as it is right now, and so maybe that is why. I think Ben Roethlisberger was even a little, I guess, peeved at the time that they selected Rudolph. So imagine if they did take Rudolph in the first round, and clearly that wouldn't have been a great selection there. But I do agree with your line of thinking there, and your other line of thinking of, I don't know how much to really believe of all this. Well, Cam Heyward has a PSA for everybody that he issued on his podcast this morning about the draft. Says you should only believe 30% of what you hear this time of year. And he says he knows for a fact that half of what you're hearing right now is fake. He made sure to say not necessarily just the Steelers, though of course he has the most information about the Steelers, so it's probably mostly about the Steelers. So what does that mean? I think I pulled up a list of kind of the recent reports that have come out about the Steelers, trying to decipher. I didn't actually go into which ones I think are fake, but just kind of leaving that up to the readers. But here's a quick list of, I probably missed some, but a quick list of kind of the late breaking kind of stuff that's happened over the last couple weeks, if we are to adhere to Heyward's PSA. First round grades on Dart and Sanders. Mike Tomlin, quote, really likes Sanders. I think that one is now confirmed as of the press conference. Visit with Sanders didn't go well. Steelers would pass on a quarterback if a defensive lineman is available. I think that's something that Dulac has been saying. Derek Harmon, medical concerns could make him fall. That was a yesterday thing. Steelers want to trade back in the first round. I think that is more or less confirmed now, but I don't know if Khan just said it was more of a possibility than trading up. I don't know if they're necessarily actively seeking to trade back, as he did say there's several guys they wouldn't trade back from. And then the Steelers aren't planning to trade into the second round. All of these things are kind of things that have been said by local media, national media, whatever it is. And some of those things, or according to Heyward, the majority of those things are not to be believed. Joe, how do you have a process or a thought process of how you kind of sift through the mess of this time of year?
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of have to filter, who it's coming from, where it's coming from. I think a lot of the team reporters at this point can be mouthpieces for the team and want to put out, maybe what the fans want to hear,
Or
even
agents?
if it's not necessarily true. So I think that's definitely, yeah, or agents, exactly. I don't know if that's necessarily all reliable information. We've seen multiple times in the past where a local reporter says something and it is patently false. Even this cycle, in free agency, no chance the team has interest in Aaron Rodgers. That will never happen. Well, where are we now? At April 22nd, and they're waiting for Aaron Rodgers to make up his mind. But as far as draft stuff, I mean, I think a lot of the key is kind of to listen to people that are really just focusing on the draft and focusing on the prospects and the analysis and where that comes from. I mean, the Bob McGinn series on Go Long doesn't pull any punches when it comes to prospects, and it's all stuff from scouts and whatever. I mean, that's not going to be fabricated by, a real stretch, especially if they're all anonymous. It's not like a team saying something to try to push a guy down a board. The Daniel Jeremiahs, the Dane Bruglers of the world, even though a lot of them, Brugler gets a lot of his pro day stuff from agents. So you hear a lot of stuff from agents, but those guys aren't afraid to, you know, say what they're hearing, good or bad sometimes. Whereas when it's coming, from a local reporter, it's coming from a national reporter, especially these national reporters, these guys are, I mean, they're all mouthpieces for agents. We saw that more than ever this free agency cycle, that every single free agency announcement had to have the agent's name and the agency, and and all the numbers were bloated but without without the actual guaranteed information. So all these national guys where they're putting out there, I think you really have to filter through the crap with them, because they're all agent mouthpieces, because they want to get the scoops and they want to get the sources when actual news breaks. So if a guy's like, "Oh, so and so is really rising up draft boards," from NFL media or ESPN, I think you really have to take it with a grain of salt, because it's probably coming from Drew Rosenhaus or David Cantor or one of those guys. So I think it's kind of just important to pay attention to who the news is coming from and where the news is coming from, because I mean, Heyward's right when he says only 30% of what you hear is true, and I think even that's probably a high number given the way that news spreads and spews around.
Yeah, and Heyward mentioned back from 2011 when he was drafted that even he felt lied to at times. And so if the players who are obviously in the process themselves and connected to the media, the agents, the teams, talking to everybody more than you or I are, even he felt lied to. The Ravens and Jets told him they'd draft him if he fell. The Ravens passed. The Jets passed. And so if players are being lied to, imagine the nonsense that gets to the media. And you're absolutely right. A little bit of inside baseball. The national media guys are absolutely trying to appease teams, trying to appease agents. There's almost no incentive for them to do, I don't want to call anybody specifically out, but accurate reporting. There's really no incentive to do that. You're just passing along what you hear from agents because, well, you're hearing it from somebody who I guess technically is in the know. It's not like you're making things up. So they're not making things up. They're protected, but they are, like you said, mouthpieces there. So yeah, little fun thing from Heyward for this time of year. And yeah, just a reminder to take everything with a grain of salt. We'll move into our listener question to wrap up the show. This is, actually, I did want to say before we get into the question, Michael Adesso, who is a loyal reader of the site, interacts with us on social media and all of that, asked us to give quick thoughts from the Daniel Jeremiah draft call and just talk about draft stuff in general. I think we've done a lot of that this episode, but Joe, if you want to just give kind of a high level, what was your biggest takeaway from the DJ draft call?
Yeah, I think some of the broader takeaways was that some of these guys I think are going to go earlier than we expect. And one in particular that kind of surprised me was Mason Taylor, the tight end from LSU. He said he thinks he'll probably go in the back half of the first round, if not the early second. The fact that, the Browns and the Giants could very well look to jump, and he specifically mentioned the Steelers are 21 multiple times to take a quarterback. I think that was kind of interesting that they would jump that far back in the first round, and kind of hinting that the Steelers could potentially take their quarterback there. One other thing was like Donovan Iziraku from Boston College. I think he had the way he talked about him was he could go anywhere from the late teens to the mid 20s. So I think it was just interesting to kind of hear the thought process league wide from where teams kind of have these guys. He said he talks to GMs all the time. So again, he's a guy that I kind of would listen to a lot when it comes to this stuff. Like before last week, I didn't even register to me that Mason Taylor would really even be a first rounder. I think the tight ends I thought to be first rounders would be Tyler Warner, Colson Loveland, and now you get a third guy. And he said Harold Fannon's another guy that could go higher than expected, although not into the first round, but he could be one of the first tight ends off the board in the second round. So just kind of the biggest takeaway to me was that there could be a few surprises come draft night, early, on Thursday and early on Friday. There could be a few names that it's like, oh, we didn't think that this guy would go here. And then sure enough, they go a little bit higher than we thought.
Yeah, this goes back to the Heyward PSA, but I found a pretty comical tweet from Eric Edholm, who works with Daniel Jeremiah NFL Network, and he said, "Here's how Daniel Jeremiah starts every day. He has his cup of coffee. He fields 3 calls from teams, and then he tries to decipher the 9 lies that he was just told." And so, Daniel Jeremiah is a guy who he has no incentive to make stuff up because he's not a reporter. He's not somebody who's looking for scoops. He is purely a draft analyst kind of guy. And yeah, even he's getting lied to by these teams and trying to decipher what's right or wrong. And so, yeah, kind of found that funny and right along the lines of what Heyward was saying. There was one other thing Daniel Jeremiah said to me that stood out. He was kind of talking about how the Steelers, since they don't have that second-round pick, there are going to be defensive linemen and there are going to be running backs that are available in the 3rd round. He said those are the 2 deepest positions. We all knew that, but I think there's a big fear that if the Steelers don't take a defensive lineman in round 1, that they're not going to be able to get these starting quality guys or these difference makers on the team. Now, are you going to get a Cam Heyward Hall of Famer? I mean, I don't think you can ever assume you're going to get that kind of guy, even in the 1st round. But I absolutely think there's going to be guys in the 3rd, even in the 4th in my mock draft. I had them doing a quarterback, like I said, Shedeur Sanders. I had them then double dipping immediately on defensive line in both the 3rd and the 4th. And like I said, waiting for running back until the 5th. And I think that's a viable strategy. There's going to be starting caliber guys available in for both of those positions well into the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds. And so as long as they kind of identify those correct guys, I found that interesting from Daniel Jeremiah. So thank you for the question, Michael Adesso. And we're going to do a quick question here from Brett in San Angelo. And if you want a question answered, 412-254-3145. It's in the show notes in case you were too slow to react to what I was saying there.
Hello, Depot Dive. This is Brett from San Angelo. And I had a question/comment about the quarterback discussion from the podcast roundtable. You had discussed Shedeur Sanders and the relative pluses and minuses. My question is, when I think about like a Jalen Milroe versus Sanders, use a baseball analogy, it's kind of like a pitcher who throws 100 miles an hour with no control versus a guy who is a soft tosser with control. Is it easier to teach the guy with velocity some control, or is it easier to teach the guy with control more velocity? To me, Sanders is kind of a limited ceiling, high floor kind of quarterback because he doesn't have an elite trait, whereas a Milroe has elite arm strength and athleticism, actually has 2 elite traits, but not much in the way of control. Long term, I just have a feeling that you're more likely to make Milroe into a franchise quarterback than Sanders, who I think his floor is probably a decent starter, but ceiling may be more Andy Dalton, that guy that can get you to the playoffs but can't win there. Would love to hear your thoughts about the comparison, and you guys have done a wonderful job on the draft coverage. Keep it up. Look forward to hearing the answer.
All right, Brett, thank you for the question as always. And basically just a difference between betting on a guy with elite traits versus betting on a guy with maybe less elite traits that is more ready right now. I think it's an interesting conversation. Joe, what are your initial thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty fair. I mean, given what Milroe has as his traits, if you can unlock the accuracy and you can unlock, some of the processing, then you're getting a really, really good quarterback. The question is, can you unlock them, and how long is that going to take, and how difficult is it going to be to make him, into that top tier level quarterback? Whereas with Sanders, you have a lot of that ability there. You don't have you don't have elite athleticism. You have okay athleticism. You don't have elite arm strength. You have okay arm strength, but you can still work on some of the other things that can make him a good quarterback. I mean, there's a lot of these guys don't have some of the top quarterbacks in the league don't have elite arm strength, but they can pick you apart over the middle of the field and can pick you apart along the sideline. So I think it's tough to kind of cap a quarterback ceiling before he's drafted. I mean, especially if it's a guy with the 1st round grade like Sanders, I think if the Steelers are taking him, they're gonna think that they can unlock a little bit more out of him. But I do agree that, Milroe, I don't think he has a higher probability of becoming a franchise quarterback because there's a lot of work that you have to do to get him to become that guy. But I mean, yeah, you can't teach the traits that he has. I just think it's really, really boom or bust. And if you're betting on that guy earlier in the draft, and you don't want to bust on that pick. Whereas Sanders, you're not going to bust, and there's still a chance that you're getting a pretty good quarterback there.
Yeah, I don't know if I agree with everything Joe just said. I don't know if I agree with your assertion, Brett, that you're more likely. Let me see what exactly you said. More likely to make Milroe into a franchise quarterback. I would strongly disagree with that. I think Sanders is much more likely to be a franchise quarterback. Milroe is a lottery ticket, and I don't know the last time you won the lottery. I have personally never won the lottery. And so I think by definition, he's not very likely probably to become a franchise quarterback, or at least less likely than somebody like Sanders, who is kind of a easier projection. I think it's the Andy Dalton comparison. I don't know if I love with Sanders. I don't know if I love comparisons in general, to be completely honest with you. We do them on our profiles because people like them. I don't know if I find a ton of value in that exercise. I think it's kind of becomes lazy when you start comparing players. And I mean, what you're hearing things like, oh, Travis Hunter is who did he just get compared to today? Justin Jefferson on offense and Champ Bailey, a Hall of Famer on defense. It's like, okay, that's just not worth talking about. And so, yeah, I don't really view him as an Andy Dalton type player. I think he has more kind of. Well, I mean, Mike Tomlin talked about it, the intangible stuff. And yeah, you can get yourself into trouble. Like Kenny Pickett, he always talked about football justice with Kenny Pickett. And so I think naturally people are going to talk about, oh, well, Tomlin just places too much of an emphasis on the intangible stuff. But some of the best quarterbacks of all time have thrived on the intangible stuff. Tom Brady, for a long time, thrived on the intangible stuff. Drew Brees thrived on some of the intangible stuff. There's a lot of guys who don't necessarily have these elite traits that can be great in the league. And so I think Sanders, he's been molded to be. I don't want to rehash everything we talked about on the roundtable since you're talking about the roundtable, but that's just my opinion. I think Sanders is more likely to be better. Somebody like Milroe, I wouldn't take in the first round. No way, no how. I would take him maybe at the end of the second if I trade it back up. But I think if he's sitting there in the third, I'd absolutely take that chance. Yes, but no, not in the first. No way. And feel free to disagree. That is totally fine. And maybe we will be looking back on this like I am an idiot, as many people probably were about guys like Lamar Jackson and others. But that's all for today's show. We're out of time. We're going to wrap up here. Next week, we will be talking about 6, possibly more, possibly less, depending on trades, more new Steelers, and actually definitely more because there will be undrafted free agents and stuff to talk about as well. It's going to be a ton to talk about. We are excited, just as excited as you are. Joe, anything else to add?
Yeah, no, just excited for the draft to get underway and over with, and so we can actually learn who's going to be on this team and stop endlessly speculating about it.
Amen. All right. Well, again, if you want to have your question answered, and maybe wait until after the draft so your questions are still relevant, since we won't have another question or another show until next Tuesday. But 412-254-3145, give us a call, leave a voicemail, or text us if you don't want your voice on the show. That is fine. We will answer that question on a future episode. That's all for today's show. I'm Ross, that's Joe, and we will catch you guys next time.